Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode on the show, Control or Be Controlled, podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. And I remain your host, Darlington. Anxiety affects hundreds of millions of people around the world, including myself. Yet, for decades, treatment options have remained largely the same. But what if the future of mental health lies not in simply managing symptoms, but in precisely targeting the biology behind them? Our guest today has spent more than 30 years in neuroscience research, authoring over 80 peer-reviewed scientific publications on topics including anxiety, Alzheimer's disease, neurobiology, and mental health. What makes our guest today's work especially compelling is that he brings both scientific expertise and personal experience to the conversation. Having lived with chronic anxiety himself, he understands the condition not only as a researcher, but also as someone who has experienced its daily challenges. His latest book, Brain Medicine, explores the emerging field of gene therapy and its potential to transform the treatment of anxiety and other neuropsychiatric disorders by offering highly targeted approaches with fewer side effects than many traditional medications. Our guest today is Dr. Troy Rohn. Dr. Troy Rohn, welcome to Control or Be Controlled.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to you on this important topic.
All right. Thank you so much. So I hope you enjoyed that introduction.
Yes, it was very good introduction. Yeah.
All right.
I am, somebody also that suffers from anxiety. And that was really one of the main motivations of writing the book was, not only to kind of show people that what anxiety is in terms of it's it's rooted, it's not just psychological, it's rooted in our brain circuits, our genes, and our proteins, but also just to give my own personal kind of story of how I've had to live with anxiety. And that was really the compelling reason why I wrote the book was, I felt like the timing was right for bringing both the science and my personal story together.
All right. Thank you so much. It's purposeful, honestly. To what you are doing is very purposeful. So I have some questions here for you. You spent more than 3 decades studying the brain. How did you first get attracted to neuroscience?
Well, I think for me, when I think about the reason why I became interested was it really came from personal frustration. Like I said, I've dealt with anxiety myself, and what stood out to me was how limited our treatment options felt, especially like my kind of anxiety where it kind of hits hard and fast. And, thinking about kind of the standard medications that are available to us today, these medications, they take a long time. They can take weeks to work, or, they don't really help in those really acute moments. And so at about the same time, my background is in neuroscience and pharmacology. So I started looking at this not just as a patient, but as a scientist, asking, why is this still the best we can do? And that really led me to kind of think about the problem differently instead of kind of repurposing these same medications. The SSRIs is what I'm talking about, like Zoloft and um, uh, Lexapro and Prozac. How about really designing therapies that really treat the underlying biology more directly and more precisely? And that question is what led me to gene therapy, and eventually into me helping co-found a company called Cognigenics, where we're trying to build a new kind of treatment for anxiety that is, based on gene therapy.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rohn. So you don't just study anxiety, you have lived with it. I myself have lived with anxiety. There was a time I used to wake up every morning in fear and in anxiety. And I kind of felt that was a spiritual problem. So what do you have to say about people who think anxiety is a spiritual problem?
Yeah, I think that's a big misconception, is that anxiety is, kind of like a person that's just overthinking, that it's a personality flaw or sign of weakness. But in reality, it's a biological brain disorder. And it's really rooted in our genes. And one of the genes that we think is really important is a gene that encodes for a receptor that binds to a neurotransmitter called serotonin. And serotonin is a chemical, it's a neurotransmitter chemical that is very important for mood. And how serotonin works is that when it's released in the brain, it binds to these receptors, and the receptors are what kind of initiate the molecular mechanisms, if you will, that lead us to have anxiety. And that's okay. Anxiety is adaptive. It's meant to be in place to help us potentially, escape a dangerous situation. Think of it as like a smoke detector. But the problem is that if you have chronic anxiety, then it becomes disabling. And, it's kind of like that smoke detector that just keeps blaring away, even though there's no more fire or smoke. And so when we think about these receptors, that's a really important piece to the puzzle. And serotonin actually binds to 15 different serotonin receptors in the brain. Yet we think that it's one receptor that is responsible for giving us these feelings of anxiety, and that's the 5-HT2A receptor. And the current medications like Zoloft and Prozac, etc., called SSRIs, basically boost serotonin throughout the brain and act on all 15 of these receptors. And that's where we can get all kinds of side effects and problems. But what if we could just tune down the one receptor that is really causing these anxiety feelings? And that's what gene therapy gives us the potential to do. It's going to give us the potential to precisely tune down this single serotonin receptor. And we've shown in animal models that when we use gene therapy to do just that, not only do we decrease anxiety, but we also greatly improve memory. So think of it, the analogy I like to use is, instead of kind of rewiring the whole house, it's like fixing that single faulty circuit.
Okay, why many will still largely believe that it's a spiritual problem? I hope they can take things from this particular answer. So, anxiety disorders affect millions of people, yet treatments haven't changed dramatically in decades. Why do you think the progress has been so slow?
Well, I just think we haven't been having enough honest conversations about how limited our current treatments for anxiety are, and how much room there is for these new approaches like gene therapy. I think that we just tend to accept medications right now that really only partially work, or come with side effects. And not without really thinking about better options. And so I think that's a important thing is that, you know, when we think about clinicians, we can't lose sight of the biology. And not only that, but one of the things that I think we need to change is reducing stigma. I think we've made progress in that area, but there's still a lot of hesitation that people have about talking about anxiety and mental health in general. Um, and that's why, again, I think my book can be really helpful in that respect because I'm a person that has anxiety and also I'm trying to find these better treatments. But the reality is that these are brain-based conditions, just like any other medical issue. And the more we kind of normalize that and make it easier for people to talk about and seek help, I think the better outcomes we're going to see.
Okay, so why do you think people are not having honest conversations about anxiety?
Well, I think that again, it's just kind of accepting the status quo, you know. Um, and what we need to do is, think of new ways that we can treat anxiety. And thinking of anxiety as really a system that's overactive and poorly regulated. And the again, the analogy here is that it's based on our own brain biology. And what we need to do is look at the underlying biology and fix that, right? Instead of just taking the aspirin for our headache, why are you getting a headache? And I think that's the approach that we really need. Now, it's not just about using drug treatments or gene therapy. It's also important that we look at other treatment strategies like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, and psychotherapy, because I see these as completely complementary. And therapy for myself is really important because it can help you kind of identify and change those thought patterns or those emotional responses that bring on anxiety. And so we really need a holistic approach, right? Therapy can really help us get to the root of why we have anxiety and give us tools that will help us kind of manage that stress and anxiety when it comes on strong. So, I think there's a holistic approach that needs to be done. And kind of what gene therapy is doing, it's adding nuance to the biology. That's important. And when people can understand the biology, I think that helps reduce shame and can help people engage in healing.
Okay, so you describe these therapies as being more precise and potentially producing fewer side effects. How do they achieve that level of precision?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And this really is where mental health treatment is going. It's becoming more individualized. And we're already moving towards this, what we call precision medicine, where treatment is really tailored to the individual rather than kind of this one size fits all approach. And a great example of this, where it's already working in medicine, is a therapy called CART therapy for cancer. And what happens in CART therapy is doctors actually will take a patient's own immune cells and then genetically modify them to target that specific cancer for that specific patient. And then they put these immune cells back into the person. And what happens is these immune cells begin to attack that cancer. So it's highly personalized. It's incredibly targeted. And I think mental health is kind of heading in that same direction, right? So again, instead of giving everyone the same SSRI and hoping it works, we're eventually going to look at someone's genetics, their brain circuitry, even their own kind of specific receptor expression. And we're going to design treatments that are much more precise. Now, it's important to understand that we're not quite there yet in psychiatry, but the model already exists, and we're just starting to apply it to the brain.
Okay. So why do you say that we are not there yet?
Well, I think it's because when we talk about gene therapies, this is an area that's just exploding, like I said, already for cancer. But when we talk about brain, it's really been delegated to those really life-threatening disorders. We think about Huntington's disease and we think about muscular dystrophy. We think about, ALS and these really fatal disorders. But when we talk about neuropsychiatric disorders like depression and anxiety, again, I think it's just been accepted. The status quo has been accepted, and but I believe that the progress that my own company has made has really kind of shown the path that this is a viable approach. Like I said, we are seeing these amazing results in our preclinical animal models. And it's real science. We're publishing these results in peer-reviewed journals. And it's not just the gene therapies themselves, but it's one of the biggest hurdles to treating something using gene therapy for a brain disorder is that it's very challenging to get these medications in the brain. And so that's one of the big things that my company has undertaken is we've been using what's called intranasal delivery approach, which is, much better than sticking a big needle in somebody's brain. And so showing, in fact, we just completed a study where in primates and monkeys where we show that we can deliver these gene therapies for anxiety intranasally, non-evasively, and these monkeys are perfectly fine. There's no side effects so far, no harm, and so these are kind of the out of the box strategies that are needed before we eventually begin to test in humans. So it's a very complicated pathway to get for drug approval. There's still there are these huge hurdles, as I said, like the blood-brain barrier. Think about cost. And in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration pathway, it's long and expensive. But we're on that road.
Okay, I really hope we get there because I don't know, anxiety is a lot, honestly.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, from your own experience, you would know that I think when I had anxiety, and I'm so grateful that I don't know how I was able to cope with that. I think constant movement helped me. I don't know. I started moving a lot, working a lot, going out a lot. I was always busy that I didn't have the time to, I don't know, anxiety didn't have the chance on me anymore. So I don't know how I was able to navigate that. But when I had anxiety, I felt like this is not how I should be living. Somebody who was dead was better off than me.
Yeah. I think that that's a very that's a very common feeling that I think all of us that have anxiety experience. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
So, talking about your new book, Brain Medicine, it introduces listeners to gene therapy. For someone with no scientific background, and you have been talking about gene therapy, what exactly is gene therapy?
Yeah, and that's a big part of the book was kind of demystifying the science behind gene therapy. Because frankly, it can be hard to understand. I remember when we first co-founded our company in 2019. I can't believe it's been 7 years now. But we were pitching some venture capitalists for some money basically to start doing our research. And I remember it was us and there were two other teams. One team was pitching a phone app, and the other team was pitching, I don't know, some kind of toilet bowl applicator, some kind of device for the toilet bowl. And here we are trying to pitch gene therapy. Needless to say that it just went way over their heads, and they had no idea what we were talking about. And I understand that now. That was one of the important lessons we learned, that we really have to break down the science. And so that's really one of the things that the book does. It really starts from a very basic, what is DNA? What is RNA? What are proteins? What kinds of gene therapies are there? Really going through the A, B's, and C's to help somebody understand then how we can apply this science to treat something like anxiety. And so I think that's one of the strengths of the book, frankly, is I really try to demystify and break down that complicated science, because it is complicated. There's no other way to get around it.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rohn. So, beyond medication and emerging therapies, I'm sure there are lifestyle habits that have the strongest scientific evidence for reducing anxiety. Can you share those habits with us?
Could you repeat that question? Sorry.
Beyond medication and emerging therapies, what lifestyle habits have the strongest scientific evidence for reducing anxiety?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, lifestyle changes are, super important. We talk about things like getting the right amount of sleep, exercising, nutrition. All of these things can impact our brain function. And these types of changes, we often kind of overlook them because they're not very flashy. They're in comparison to medicine and gene therapy, but they can have a massive impact on brain function. So these types of lifestyle changes are really shaping neurotransmitter balance in our brain, our stress response, how we respond to stress, and kind of our overall brain health. So in a lot of ways, these lifestyle factors they're really the foundation. And if they're not in place, then it's going to be much harder for anything else to really work effectively. And so, yeah, I always am promoting ways to manage our stress. What are the, things that we can do to manage our stress? And there are lots of easy things that we can do every day to reduce our stress, but also looking at that nutritional aspect, physical exercise. I'm a firm believer that there's really nothing better you can do for your brain or your body for that matter, than to have regular exercise. So yeah, incorporating these lifestyle factors are really important and easy things we can do.
Okay. So is it possible that we might not be needing any medical, but lifestyle is enough for anxiety? Is that possible?
Yeah, of course. I think it's possible, but then there are people where the anxiety, and I think it really is depends on the degree of anxiety that you have, and whether or not lifestyle changes or therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, can be enough. But for some people, it's not enough. The anxiety is just too overwhelming. And that's when we really need to bring in medication to help these people. And again, it's understanding that this is a biological, medical disorder, right? It's rooted in these receptor systems that are overactive, right? These smoke detectors that are not turning off. And so when I think in those cases, people can turn to these medications and they do help. So again, it's really understanding this holistic approach. But in some people, absolutely, I think lifestyle changes and maybe some therapy will be enough for them to help manage their anxiety. But in others, like myself, it's not enough.
So why did you say yours is not enough? So you think there are different stages of anxiety and most are very, very complicated?
Yeah, I mean there's actually, if we look at anxiety disorders, it's one of the broadest categories of psychiatric disorders out there. There's many different types of anxiety disorders, and we could also even throw in things like OCDs, which now are kind of considered separate than anxiety disorder, but they used to be, obsessive compulsive disorders used to also be kind of lumped together. And frankly, we do use the same medications to treat both, but, I think part of the heterogeneity that we see in people is because of the fact that not everybody has the same type of anxiety. And so everybody has to be treated individually. And whether that is through counseling, through medication, or through lifestyle changes, that is something that each person has to kind of figure out themselves through their primary care provider and their potential, therapists. So it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's an important thing that we need to recognize about anxiety.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Ron. So, someone struggling with chronic anxiety today, probably like the one you had, what message would you want them to hear?
Yeah, I think that the getting back to gene therapy, the precision we're starting to achieve in treatments, we're moving from this one size fits all approach to something more targeted. And I think that that there's hope there that not only are we getting these potentially better medications, but just for people to realize that they're not alone. That there are a lot of people out there that are suffering from anxiety, but there's hope because I think we're really making progress on coming up with better treatments, and understanding at the root level of why people have anxiety. We're really beginning to understand kind of that brain circuitry. And again, I think with understanding comes reduced, stigmatism, and allows us to talk more about this important thing that we call mental health. So, yeah, I think there's good reasons to be hopeful.
Okay. Thank you so much. There's definitely good reasons to be Very, very hopeful. So, looking ahead 10 or 20 years, how do you think neuroscience will change the way we understand and treat mental health?
Well, again, I think it's something I've already spoke about, but I think just being able to have personalized medicine, being able to look at your own genetic makeup, your own brain chemistry, your background, and being able to design a specific treatment strategy, be it a specific gene therapy or some other medication, as well as, more specific cognitive type therapies. I think that's where medicine's going. It's going to this what we would call personalized medicine, and that's really because we really now know how important our genetic makeup is. Yes, the environment is important, and I like to say that genetics kind of loads the gun, but it's the environment that kind of pulls the trigger. So we know that there's these heritable components to anxiety, but environmental factors, especially early in life, are very important, like childhood trauma, neglect, and even ongoing stress. These all can influence how brain circuits kind of develop, particularly those that are involved in fear. And so I think that, this is kind of the vision that I see for all medicine is really this holistic approach where it's personalized and targeted.
All right. Thank you so much for sharing both your scientific expertise and your personal journey. Conversations like this reminds us that progress is mental health. Progress in mental health comes through curiosity, compassion, and a commitment to better understanding the human brain. So for those who would like to learn more about your work and your book, Brain Medicine, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me. This is such an important question, and it was a great topic to talk about. I think the best way people can just learn more about myself, my book, is on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is Dr. Troy Rohn, TroyRohn. So that's all one word, Dr. Troy Rohn. My book, Brain Medicine, also can be found very easily on Amazon. It's available both through the Kindle version as well as through paperback. So, thanks again for this great discussion. I really appreciate your, being, providing this platform that we can talk about this issue that not just affects me and you, but affects millions of people out there.
All right. Thank you so much. And I really hope people can take one or two from this and be able to work on their anxiety as well. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening to Control or Be Controlled. If you found today's conversation valuable, everyone should find this conversation valuable because it's anxiety we are talking about here. Please subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who may benefit from it. Until next time, remember that understanding your mind is one of the most powerful steps you can take towards taking control of your life. I will see you guys on the next episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Ron, for coming to my show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.
Great. Thanks a lot.